Hello and welcome to Dialogue. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul has just wrapped up a two-day visit to China, the first such trip since Berlin's new government took office, and one that comes amid an unusually active wave of European diplomacy in Beijing. During his meeting with senior Chinese officials, Wadephul discussed trade, investment, supply chain stability, rare earth management, and industrial cooperation. He also emphasized that direct engagement with China has become irreplaceable for Germany and Europe. What does this visit reveal about the current state of China-Germany relations? What issues now sit at the heart of the bilateral agenda? And as more European leaders travel to China, what can we expect from the next stage of China-EU engagement? Join us for discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, joining me today are Victor Gao Zhikai, Chair Professor from Soochow University, Ulrich Brueckner, Professor of Political Science at Stanford University in Berlin, and Joel Ruet, Chairman of the Bridge Tank. Welcome to the show. Victor, you are in Berlin too, here, just as Professor Brueckner. This is the first visit to China by a German foreign minister under this new government. So what do you make of his China trip?
Thank you very much for having me. Greetings from Berlin. I'm here for a visit with German counterparts, and we all talk about this important visit by the German foreign minister to China as we speak. First of all, I think China opened the door widely to welcome him and considered it as a very important meeting, especially in preparation for Chancellor Merz's upcoming visit to China. Secondly, it is also true that the foreign minister's visit didn't go on originally as planned because there was some hiccup. We need to be honest about it. But I think the fact that the foreign minister overcame the hiccup and did successfully visit China means that between China and Germany, there are more common things which bind us together, especially at this turbulent moment in historical development. And I don't think China and Germany or China and EU as a whole are enemies or adversaries to each other. There are more things in common to bind us together. And I think personally, the foreign minister's visit is very important, bridging the gaps between the two countries. And hopefully the foreign minister himself will also understand better and promote China-German cooperation as vigorously as he can to make sure that both China and Germany will succeed in our economic development, as well as in defending free trade and also making the whole world a more peaceful place for mankind as a whole.
Well, Joe, from Paris, the German foreign minister visit came right after President Macron's China trip there. I mean, how do you look at the relationship between China and Germany, especially compare that to the one between China and France after the foreign minister's visit? And then, what do you make of this recent trip?
Yeah, thank you so much. Good to be on Dialogue again. There's a saying in France that is that comparison is no reason. I wouldn't dare to compare the Franco-Chinese relationship and the German-China relationship. I think from a point of view of a European, what matters is that there's a succession of visits, that visits keep coming, and I would say they even intensify at this very crucial moment for the history of our world. And I'm really saying the history because there are so many challenges. I believe there is a strong coordination between President Macron and Chancellor Merz, and this is what matters. There's also a very strong cooperation between the two ministries, not just persons, but the two ministries of foreign affairs in France and Germany work hand in hand in planning, discussing, debriefing those visits. And of course, in terms of economic interest, the positions between the French industry and the German industry in the relationship with China might be slightly different. There would be some different fine-tuning on the positions. But what is important is to understand that beyond those differences which are always emphasized in the media, the main core issues of tackling together between Europe and China the new industries, the new technologies, and the new markets is mostly shared across our industries in Germany and France. So it's very good that those visits happen. They will be positive at the end.
It's very good to have those visits happen. Victor, since you are in Berlin, so I wonder how what's the general mood among the intellectuals, among the public about the relationship with China, about the foreign minister's trip to China?
Well, first of all, I think people in Germany care about the Ukraine war. They want to see its ending very rapidly in dignity. And I think they have some negative views about the role China has been playing. But I emphasize to them that China's position about the Ukrainian war from day one. China has been calling on both Russia and the Ukraine to stop the war as quickly as possible. And China has been unwavering in trying to put pressure on both Russia and the Ukraine to stop the war. And China does not support any escalation of the war or spilling out of control of the war. And I hope the German government, people in Germany, and in EU at large will realize that China's persistent, consistent position of ending the war in Ukraine is actually in the Europeans' general interest. Secondly, I think there is a lot of concern about how the German economy will need to improve to overcome many challenges, etc. I firmly believe that China and Germany can cooperate together for mutual benefit. And I even went on to say that only China can be a significant player in helping Germany pulling itself out of economic recession, which is imminent, and try to reorient itself for the future development, especially in lining up energy security, and also for Germany to play a significant role in the upcoming AI transformation.
Speak of that, Joe, of course, a very important part of the trip is about trade and investment between the two nations. From the German side, it seems there's a concern, there's a imbalance of trade, of course, and the German industries, some of the companies are coming to China to invest in China. And from the Chinese side, of course, they would say, there's a recession, there are domestic challenges in terms of the German economy. I mean, how do you look at, in general, the European economy, its relationship with China? And obviously, both sides, they're not exactly on the same page, but of course, well, agreeing with each other that this relationship is of huge importance for both sides.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think this visit is a unique opportunity to discuss hand in hand, face to face, and possibly heart to heart, the future of our economic relationship. The present, the current situation is this trade disbalance, but you would also see, according to me, that there's an investment disbalance. European countries, European economies have invested a lot in China. Some of the trade disbalance is Chinese companies' exports to Europe, but some part of it is European companies producing in China, exporting in Europe. We are at the very, very end of a cycle, and the next cycle ought to be Chinese investment in Europe. Chinese investment in Europe to cater for the European market, but also possibly to re-export from Europe to other parts of the world, because I just don't buy the argument that there are no competitive advantages in Europe, in the EU, which is a vibrant zone with 500 million people, with a stable currency. And in terms of stability of currency and in terms of soundness of growth, it's much less dependent on borrowings from the rest of the world than the US and the US dollar based economy is concerned. Beyond the usual commentaries, I think that from president to president, there is a possibility to look forward to the future and see which are the industries which are welcome right from now from China in terms of investment to Europe. For those other industries where we have difficulties, where we have issues to replenish, they will be replenished. It's a long-term work, but long story short, we are at the end of a cycle. There's no problem having an end of a cycle, provided we are able to initiate the beginning of a new cycle. The new cycle is on AI, is on redefining together the future of the automotive industry, of the automotive markets. One market may lead to another at some point in time, then the other market leads to another at another point in time. Unless we want to have those two markets forever disconnected, we have to work. And those segments of the automotive industry, for instance, which are leading in China, have a long-term interest in having those very same segments keep dynamic in Europe. Last but not least, I don't buy the argument that Europe is on the verge of a crisis. You know, the good advantage of being a European in his 50s is that for the last 40 years that I remember, we've been told that the EU is in a crisis, and the institutional construction has deepened, the financial economic integration has deepened, and the new generation, they feel Europeans.
Well, Professor Brueckner, are you with us?
Yes.
Please, that's good. Share with us, what do you make of this visit? And, the foreign minister, during his trip to China, met not only the Chinese foreign minister, his counterpart, but also the commerce minister, of course, the vice president of China, and also minister from other departments. That's, I would say, rather productive in terms of the meetings there. And in terms of the contents, in terms of the concerns from both sides, seems that's also very clear. Chips, in terms of rare earth elements, in terms of trade, etc. But overall, what's your impression of the trip?
Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more to what my French colleague has pointed out. We can write a history of the success story of European integration as a chain of crisis. And it's the same here. We tend to overestimate difficulties and conflicts among member states or certain positions in how countries are affected. But this is the nature of the European Union. It's a group of sovereign states, and these sovereign states send representatives to China because what matters for the European Union as a whole is not always the same when we look at what's important in France or what's important in Germany. And to make it even harder to understand, Germany is run by a coalition government. So we have seen the vice chancellor, who also is the minister of finance, coming to China to highlighting what the Social Democrats think is the best strategy to bridge clashes of interest between Germany, the European Union, and China. And now we have seen the foreign minister, who happens to be a member of the Chancellor's party, to prepare the meeting or the visit of Chancellor Merz next year coming to China. So all of this is sort of micromanaging in a cacophonic orchestra how the European Union appears from time to time. But at the end of the day, it's the largest single market in the world. And as my colleague pointed out, a powerhouse when it comes to economic affairs, but also sort of learning the hard way in the last couple of years that dependencies have to look at carefully, that they are not asymmetric, but that they are symmetric, and then we all benefit as we benefited from globalization in the last 20 years.
Of course, I think as far as I know, there's no problem for China to deal with or to handle with any countries with a different political system or whatever, kind of government, because China cherishes, the one principle that, sovereign equality, every country is equal. Under that principle, China deals with other countries, with whatever ideology or political systems. At the same time, of course, trade balance or imbalance, there are different opinions over there. We'll come back and talk more about that. But before that, Victor, one of the issues standing out from the foreign minister's trip to China is, of course, the chips, the stable supply of chips. I would say next career related chips We know what happened to Nexperia, the Chinese company. The headquarters was nationalized in the surprising move by the Dutch government. And that caused the disruption of the supply of chips, not only to the German companies, I would say to the companies from other countries too, around the world. So where are we now, Victor? And what do you make of this incident, let's say?
Thank you very much for asking this very important question. I think China and Germany and China and EU together have vested interest in defending free trade, not only for semiconductors, for many other things. And I think weaponizing semiconductor chips by the United States, or as it wants to force other countries to weaponize it, is the wrong thing to do. Therefore, I hope China and the Netherlands will overcome whatever problems there are and promote free trade in chips, rather than allowing the Netherlands or any other EU member states to be hijacked by the United States in its war of chips against China. Because fundamentally, the American chips war against China will be a disaster, because China is fast becoming independent and self-reliant in manufacturing of chips of all kinds. And I would say in a matter of 3 to 5 years, China will no longer need to import any chips from abroad. That is not what China wanted to do. That's being forced by the chips war. And I hope the Europeans will also learn a lesson. Only by cooperating with China for mutual benefit will be it as a better policy. And if you want to weaponize anything, chips or dollar or SWIFT system, it will not overcome China. China will become more resilient and more self-independent and reliant, for example. So the fundamental point is for China and EU, China and all European countries to defend the free trade. That will make both China and EU member states, the Chinese people and the European people, stronger going forward.
Well, Professor Brueckner, of course, you speak of the EU market. I think the Chinese side stressed very much about the importance of the EU market. In a sense, China relies on the EU market, to a larger degree. The U.S. market in the Southeast Asia, ASEAN market. I think, China sees it like a mutual dependence. European Union, to a certain degree, in a certain area, depend on the Chinese side. China depends on the European market. That's what we see. But anyway, there are differences. People would say that's normal state between states. Foreign Minister Wadephul said that, I quote, direct engagement with China has become irreplaceable amid the rising global tensions, and stressed that freedom, security, and prosperity in Germany and Europe are closely linked to China. And then, so what's your response to the remarks?
Generally speaking, we couldn't agree more. Also, what my colleague from China just said, we shouldn't weaponize forms of asymmetric dependencies because that certainly harms both sides. But if we closely look at the changes in our global economy, even from sort of a part of the single market, like the interest of German companies, we have already a very diverse picture. We have big players that are massively invested in China, and for them, de-risking means to do more to benefit from a growing market in China. On the other hand, as you said, the European market is important for China. It is, but it is of shrinking importance because we also see other emerging markets that gain more and more importance. And that means that China needs the Europeans less. At the moment, they do need us because with American President Trump's Liberation Day, we see a lot of distortion and redirecting of trade. And that means that an open economy like the European market is the place to send overcapacities to. And that's a major challenge for the backbone of our European industries. And Germany in particular has a higher percentage in what generates our growth. We are close to 20% of industry. And if this is openly attacked by overcapacities that Chinese companies produce for less than their production costs, then it certainly creates a problem, and we cannot gloss over just by highlighting harmony and balance.
Well, Professor Brueckner, you mentioned about the Labor Day, the tariffs from the U.S. on China, on European countries too. Remember, not only on China, many countries, right? So China was under pressure. China, will somehow turn to European Union. Well, what's happening right now is, increasing pressure on the European Union from Washington. There's a latest detail revealed by the media that, there's a idea of like C5, the core five countries, U.S., China, Russia, Japan, India, without even mentioning the EU or, U.S. is ideologically siding with Hungary, with Austria, basically disregarding the European Union, excluding it from the international relations. Now, can we say somehow like the EU and China probably should get closer in terms of upholding, multipolar or multilateral relationship around the world?
Well, we both greatly benefited from multilateralism and from how globalization has been managed since the beginning of the century. But as I said, we have to closely look at if this leads to asymmetric dependencies or if these dependencies are mutual. And if there is a chance that something could be weaponized, it would harm both sides. So just swinging from a century of transatlantic relations just because the current American president has different opinion about the values and the principles and multilateralism in general is not what we will see. We are so interconnected with the United States that they will remain the biggest business partner. If we have ideological differences and if the American president believes that our extremist parties that want a different political systems should be supported, this is an intervention of our internal affairs and it shouldn't be the American business. But whether it would be a smarter idea to change dependencies with another single partner is also a strategy that one should more closely look at. But we definitely have a lot in common, and there is an urgent need to better understand each other's position. I'm always impressed to see how much more China pays attention to what's going on in Europe compared with how little Europeans understand about what's going on in China. And this is also an asymmetry that should openly be addressed.
Well, to Joe, of course, as you mentioned, this is a crucial time. Tell us more on that. How do you look at the rapidly changing global landscape? China, Europe, European Union, the United States, Russia, and other factors, other players there. And of course, we are talking about China-European Union relationship. What's the next stage? Chancellor Merz is coming to China after a series of visits. President Macron earlier came from Spain. So people are looking forward to more engagement, listening to each other. And then, ultimately, what we are looking for, how can we deal with the changing world?
Well, my suspicion is that the current changes have on the face value extravaganza, and in reality, they are clear messages. When President Trump changes the doctrine, and when one mentions about the core group of the world not having the EU, well, it's beautiful ideology, but you can't wipe off just with ideology a zone which has 500 million people, which is the largest single integrated market, which is moving forward a sanitized, sound financial union very progressively, but without the systemic risk that the US have, or without some macroeconomic difficulties that some other countries have, not to mention an economy on the verge to collapse like Russia has. So ideology is good, but that's its extravaganza. But the clear message is that don't depend on allies. And the notion of independence, strategic independence, is well articulated around what my colleague Professor Brueckner mentioned the symmetric asymmetry. If the asymmetric dependence versus symmetric dependence. If at all we understand that after decades of integration, we might work and develop new strategies, new cycles, new partnerships on asymmetric, on symmetric dependencies, we are good. The moment we believe there could be an asymmetry, we give the floor to weaponizing. What Professor Gao mentioned, I agree with many things that he said about weaponization. One should not weaponize, because if at all, weaponization is non-directional. Weapons are either directional, they hit one target, or non-directional. Weaponization of economic tools is just something we don't control, and this can have spillover effect. It's non-directional, But, and I agree with this, but when I hear that in a few years one country would be absolutely independent, absolutely, that is asymmetrically independent on one technologies, and that, I quote Professor Gao, European countries would learn a lesson, should learn a lesson, and etc. That's a kind of sentence which is slippery, and which we should not have as analysts. It's good when ideologues say that. I mean, we can bear with that. We know that we have to go without them, and that we know that they have only a time validity in history. There will be another president after Mr. Trump. But if analysts in analytical circles start mentioning that and bending towards asymmetric systems, then globalization is doomed. Then the stabilizing factor of interdependence is endangered. So I strongly militate for being absolutely factual and accepting the notion of symmetric dependencies, working on them, understanding that within one stream, within one segment, the symmetry might be not completely symmetrical, but that in the other segments it's balanced. It's balancing those first segments. But whenever we start thinking in terms of nationalist and asymmetric movements, it's dangerous.
Ultimately, it's about the cooperation, let's say, for the better development, for the betterness of everybody. It was pointed out that Wadephul's rhetoric during the visit was noticeably softer and more pragmatic than his earlier statements. So, Professor Brueckner, so people say it's better for China, Germany, and the EU to cooperate rather than fixating on differences. Very briefly, your opinion?
Absolutely. And we have to take into consideration that the German foreign minister is kind of a beginner as a representative of German diplomacy before he was a parliamentarian. And in the free world, people in parliament say what they want, and they don't really care about the consequences of their wording. Well, being a foreign minister for just a few months make him someone who might misunderstand what certain comments or certain phrases cause as a reaction on the other side. So I wouldn't overestimate his comments, but I also noted that he was trying to be more careful and respectful when it comes to sensitivities on the other side.
Well, right, that's the job of the top diplomat, right? With that, we are coming to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.